Thanks for being here. For those of you that I don't know, I am Catherine Robb, and I am the chair, or I was the chair, I'm the founder and the former chair of the LBJ Future Forum, and we are one of the co-sponsors tonight. And so I wanted to just tell you all really quickly about the Future Forum. If you are a member, thank you for being here, and if not, I think we have information here. If not, you can talk to one of us. We'd love to tell you more about it. The very short version is that we are a membership organization, part of the LBJ Library, with the goal of sort of encouraging civic engagement and involvement. And one of the ways we do that is by putting on programs of interest to our members and to the community, to educate, to get people engaged, and hopefully get people to sort of talking to each other and sort of involved in issues and finding ways to better their communities. So along those lines, we are really excited about the program this evening. Want to, and I'm not going to introduce anything except to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to everyone here that is involved with the Texas Access for Justice Foundation. We're thrilled to be a part of this evening. This is obviously a topic that's really important, and just so glad to see that so many people care and are willing to step up. So with that said, I'm going to introduce David Smith, who is the chair of the Future Forum at the moment. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing the program.
Thanks, Catherine. Catherine's very modest. Catherine is the honorary chair and chair emeritus of the board, and I'm definitely humbled to follow in her footsteps. But I think on behalf of Catherine and I, we're both thrilled to have this event here. It's been one that we've been looking forward to for a long time. Both Catherine and I are practicing attorneys, although some would accuse me of not actually practicing law, and they don't know quite what I do. But it's a thrill to have y'all here, and it's a thrill to be able to partner with the Texas Access to Justice Foundation to really highlight this important program that is sponsored and supported on a voluntary basis by attorneys in this state. And one of the things to give a plug for the Future Forum, one of the principles of it is we try to inspire people to be leaders and builders and doers. And along those lines, I want to introduce Lamont Jefferson, who's the 30th anniversary committee chair, who embodies being a builder and a doer. He is I think you're the managing partner at Haynes & Boone's in San Antonio, where I was earlier today. And I want to welcome Lamont and say thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, David. So yesterday morning, I was in a courtroom in a mid-sized town in Texas, packed courtroom. Media was covering the event, as reported in the papers this morning. But the most important part of that courtroom experience was not so much what happened in our hearing, but what happened before our hearing, because the judge in that courtroom had a full docket, as all judges do, and a full quarter of that full docket was self-represented litigants. And he struggled through trying, as we watched we had our PowerPoint presentations and our elaborate arguments all prepared, and we watched as this judge methodically and patiently worked his way case by case to assist these individuals who really had no idea what they were doing and were presenting arguments and forms to the court that made no sense. And that is what happens every day in every courtroom throughout Texas and throughout the country. And it is a problem that was recognized by the Texas Supreme Court 30 years ago when it established the Texas Equal Access to Justice Commission and the Equal Access to Justice Foundation. The work of that commission goes to the cornerstone of our very society. It is one of the most important tasks that we have, is to make sure that all of our citizens have access to justice. So with that, I am so proud to be a part of this momentous event with LSC in town and this very distinguished panel talking about the most important issues that we face today. And I would like to thank, of course, the LBJ Presidential Library for hosting this event, along with the LBJ Future Forum, LSC, and the State Bar of Texas. And I'd also like to very much thank our panel for devoting their time to this very incredibly important issue. And with that, I'll turn it over to the distinguished Elizabeth Christian.
Thank you. Thank you, and I join these voices in welcoming you to the LBJ Library. I in my private, spare time, I'm the president of the LBJ Foundation. It's really my honor to work here as someone who cares about this president and knows the impact that he had on so many lives. And the world that you all live in, the world of access to justice, is a different world because of our president. So we think it's very fitting that you're here in his library, and we're very grateful to you for being here. We have such a distinguished panel tonight, and I'm going to introduce them briefly in a moment. We have Congressman Pete Gallego from the 23rd District of Texas. We have Chief Justice Nathan Hecht, the Supreme Court of Texas, and we have Dean Martha Minow of the Harvard Law School. What a panel. Please help me welcome them. Before I dive in and tell you a little bit about them, I want to just, in the president's own words, say what I think this president felt and the reason why legal services and equal access to justice were important to him. He truly cared about poor people, and he really knew that if we didn't do things, all sorts of things, and we have momentous anniversaries coming up in the next few years. We have civil rights, we have war on poverty, we have every imaginable Great Society program, so many of which are still extant, and we are all benefiting from those. This is in President Johnson's own words. My students, when he taught in Cotulla, Texas, a very small, very poor area, were poor and often came to class without breakfast and hungry. And they knew, even in their youth, the pain of prejudice. They never seemed to know why people disliked them, but they knew it was so because I saw it in their eyes. I never thought then, in 1928, that I would be attending here, standing here in 1965. It never occurred to me in my fondest dreams that I might have the chance to help the sons and daughters of those students and to help people like them all over the country. But I do have that chance. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I mean to use it. And he did. So, thank you. I could not be more humbled to be on this stage, so let's hope that my questions do these folks justice. I'll start with at my far left here. Congressman Gallego represents the 23rd District of Texas, includes parts of Bexar and El Paso counties and 27 other counties in West Texas. I'm guessing that your district is as big as New England, maybe.
It's bigger than 29 states.
Kind of what I thought. And prior to your election to Congress, he was 23 years in our Texas House and was the pioneering legislative hero for legal aid services funding in the legislature. And the Texas situation would be far different if it hadn't been for you, Congressman. Thank you. You've been on the board of the Texas Access to Justice Foundation since '96 and is currently the treasurer. Chief Justice Nathan Hecht was appointed 27th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas by Governor Perry in October, when a certain Wallace Jefferson stepped aside. Oh, there you are, Chief. This month, he's celebrating his 25th anniversary on the court. I think you're the longest-serving justice Texas has had. You're the senior Texas appellate judge in active service. Chief Justice Hecht was first elected to the court in 1988 as a justice and has been reelected 4 times. He has been responsible for the court's efforts to assure that Texans living below the poverty level have access to basic civil legal services. And I personally had the pleasure of going around to different editorial boards in the state and watched him in action during our last legislative session and know how passionate he is on this issue. He is a terrific ambassador on that. Dean Minow is, and I want to say that in the French way, I keep saying that, it's Minow, appointed under President Obama. The Dean serves as Vice Chair of the Legal Services Board of Directors. She co-chaired LSC's Pro Bono Task Force. As Dean of Harvard Law School, she provides guidance and support for 27 clinics that provide access to legal services for low-income individuals and others lacking access to law. In over 200 publications, her scholarship addresses rights of children, women, people with disabilities, and members of racial and religious minority groups. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for being here. We thought we would start tonight and really have kind of an arc to this story and talk about past, present, and future, where we think we're going. So I thought the first question, if y'all could just each of you address briefly, let's just take a step up to 10,000 feet. Why is it so important that we have equal access to justice? Congressman, why don't you start?
You want me to start?
You're trying to pass the
You
ball.
can hit that one out
No,
of the
no,
park.
let's go then. I know, it's a softball.
Look, I think it's critical that people have access to justice because fundamentally it's an issue of fairness. I mean, we all talk about this country as a country of opportunity, but there's so many opportunities out there that folks may not be able to avail themselves of. And, you know, people think of it in terms of legal services to the poor. And the truth is that that term poor is not really in vogue anymore. Nobody wants to be poor, and even the poor don't think of themselves as poor, and that's just not. But when you think about the veterans, for example, you think about the victims of hurricanes, you think about all of these other folks that have really benefited, and you understand why this should be a core function. This should be something. I mean, it really is a mission, I think, for people, and I think it's critical that we continue that.
Chief?
It's just essential to the rule of law. And to have a justice system, which is not only the finest in the world, but it's the finest in the history of the world, that people can't get to when they need it because it's out of reach for reasons of expense, is just outrageous. And so we have to do what we can to make sure that it is within reach of everyone who needs it. And fortunately, we are in a profession as lawyers that has always recognized as one of its noble callings to represent people free of charge. And lawyers give enormous amounts of time doing that. But we also need help monetarily and these days from the public to keep the system in place. So it's just crucial to the justice system.
Dean?
Well, access to justice relieves suffering in the most direct way. It also strengthens the laws that make everybody free and secure. If only some people have access to justice, then we do not have a justice system. And it is also the case that, frankly, access to justice saves money. Because if you can actually enforce people's rights, then it means that there will not be further burdens for their extended families, the communities, the state, and the society. So whether it's idealistic purposes or practical purposes, access to justice is critical.
That's great. Thank you. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the history. Dean, would you please just reflect, LSC, 40 years old, talk a little bit about its mission, its beginning.
Well, absolutely. And it is such an honor to be here in this library in tribute to the president who actually presided over the origins of the Legal Services Corporation. And I just want to say personally that I find this a humbling moment to be here with this panel and in this place. So the Legal Services Corporation took shape when President Lyndon Johnson framed the war on poverty and created the Office of Economic Opportunity in 1964. And Sergeant Shriver actually made the particular argument that there ought to be some money set aside in the Office of Economic Opportunity to protect the legal rights of low-income people. That idea, of course, had roots, and its roots go back to the 1870s when there were societies of lawyers and immigrant groups that advocated for access to justice, gaining more momentum in the teens, around 1919, when Reginald Hebert Smith wrote a book about justice in the poor, and societies to serve the poor grew up in some cities, bar associations. But there was, even by the 1960s, just a patchwork quilt, and it was mostly holes in that kind of system. And so the idea of having a national commitment of providing access to justice for low-income people took hold, and it became really a mainstay of the war on poverty. In the 1970s, an idea emerged to actually institutionalize the funding for legal services and to make sure that it wasn't simply a patchwork with many, many holes. And it was President Nixon who actually developed one of the proposals for what became the Legal Services Corporation Act. There were drafts of the statute that were written also by Democrats, drafts written by Republicans. A bill was enacted. The president signed it, and Congress created the Legal Services Act in 1974. Since that time, the Legal Services Corporation has served as the national program of financial support for civil legal assistance and distributing federal funds to local organizations across the country, supporting those organizations in partnership with organizations like the Texas Access to Justice Foundation to assure high-quality legal services for poor people and also stewardship of public funds in a responsible way.
Thank you. Chief, the IOLTA program is clearly critical to the success of all this effort. Could you talk a little bit about its roots and its origins?
Well, it sprang up in the fear that something might happen to LSC funding, and if it did, then where would we be? And so the idea was, well, here's this money sitting over here that could be used for this. And at first, IOLTA is kind of an established idea now. We think of it as just a program that's been around a long time. But at the first, it was very controversial, and it was controversial in the bar. It was when the Supreme Court of Texas made it mandatory in the late 80s, there was a lot of pushback in the legislature. And where do you get the authority to do this? And so there was quite a bit of resistance to it. Of course, it's been to the U.S. Supreme Court twice. So that resistance lasted over a period of time. But from those sort of faltering beginnings, it has come to be a mainstay of support throughout the country until, of course, the recent downturn in the economy with interest rates hovering at zero. The interest on lawyer trust accounts is not very much, not nearly as much as it once was. But I just think the development of that program, the defense of it in the U.S. Supreme Court, the acceptance of it throughout the country shows the creativity and the determination to fund these basic civil legal services in a good way.
Congressman, the legal aid delivery system is also in the process of evolution, and it has been. Could you address that, especially from a perspective of a rural legislator and congressman? How does that happen?
Well, Alpine is 6,000 people, and for my years in the legislature, I represented places like Del Rio and Eagle Pass, and what were to me big cities because they had traffic lights. I mean, that was my measurement. But I always argued that they, regardless of the size of city that you live in, I mean, theoretically everybody's supposed to be equal before the bar of justice. And so for me, it became something of a mission, really. I mean, when I got on the board of IOLTA of the foundation in '96, there was one pot of money, and that was IOLTA. That was the interest on lawyers' trust accounts. And so being creative over the years with, Cypre, with the different kinds of fees, you don't have a license to practice in Texas, but you want to come in for a little, okay, well, this Pro Hack VHA motion is going to cost you X. Finding creative ways to raise money, and then with the state appropriation, that frankly was a huge victory. And so, over the course of time, I think the board and the lawyers and the court worked together in an incredible fashion, really, to expand this network to the point that I think last year the foundation gave $30 million in grants, but only $4 million of that was IOLTA. $26 million came from other sources. So it has really been, and I congratulate the Supreme Court and the folks who have really taken leadership in building the system, because there's a legal aid office across the street from me in Alpine, Texas. There's a legal aid office in Del Rio. People are actually now receiving, and there's so much where I don't want to, you can't claim victory yet because we're not where we need to be, but we've come a long way in the years since this has started.
I do think it's easy to think about the glass half empty when, in fact, there's a lot of half full aspect.
Well, and whether the glass is half empty or full always depends. It depends on whether you're drinking or pouring, right?
That's really true. Keeping with the arc of our story here, we're moving now from kind of where we've been. Let's talk a little bit about the president. Dean, could you just talk a little about the changing nature of the legal profession? There's different moves to make court more accessible, and so forth. Could you just bring us up to speed on that?
Sure. The idea that court is the only place to protect rights is, of course, not true. Most people who have a legal question don't go to court, never get close to a lawyer. There are many other opportunities that include negotiation, mediation, and finding ways to highlight those paths for people who aren't lawyers is an opportunity now, but also a challenge. As the Chief Justice described, we're living at a moment where there's a confluence of disturbing forces. The interest rates making IOLTA not the wonderful source that it had been. The financial disaster of 2008 that has left in its wake so many people in just devastation. With their homes foreclosed, or living in buildings as renters where the buildings have been foreclosed. And in addition, the veterans returning home, as the Congressman described, returning home, needing some help to navigate the veteran system, needing help to put their lives back together, their families, and finding that they can't even get a lawyer to help them navigate the system. And another thing that's, I think, very challenging at this particular moment is the ways in which state and towns and cities, many of them are dealing with budgets that are devastated themselves. Bankruptcy being declared by a city. Then nonprofit organizations are also struggling. So all the possible sources of safety nets for people who are in trouble are themselves in trouble. And there are more people in trouble than we've seen in a long time. So just as an example, just unfortunately, for organizations that are funded by the Federal Legal Services Corporation have had to lay off 13% of their lawyers in the last year, 15% of their non-legal staff. 16 offices closed last year. And if you're in a rural community and an office closes, where's the next closest office? It literally is hundreds of miles away. If you're a poor person, you don't have a car, you don't have the money to pay for a bus, or someplace to stay overnight, because that's what it's going to involve. And so it actually means the denial of access to services. That's what this moment means. Because of the reduction in funding, just at the federal level, 80,000 Americans this year who would have received legal services last year will not receive them. I visited an office recently that is only open 2 days a month to take new cases because they're already full up and they don't have enough lawyers. So on the one hand, it's a great time. There's the possibility of new technologies and new communication, sharing legal knowledge with people who aren't lawyers. And on the other hand, we're seeing some of the great advances just disappearing before our very eyes.
Chief, you've talked pretty passionately about this being a nonpartisan issue and not necessarily an issue that's only about poor people. And you've also seen firsthand how courts can help with this. Could you address that a little bit?
Well, it's something that affects the courts because we're, as Lamont was describing earlier, there's a courtroom full of pro ses that are struggling, trying to handle their own cases, a judge who's trying to get through it. Meanwhile, a courtroom full of lawyers with the clock ticking, and clients having to pay, waiting on this to happen. So there really has to be a developing effort to meet these kind of these changing needs. The dean mentioned veterans. The veterans do come back with very hard legal needs, but the State Bar of Texas has stood up to that. Terry Tottenham's here someplace, and developed a program to really help lawyers get engaged with this. Well, sometimes there's a silver lining to some of these clouds, and as a country, thank goodness, we're very supportive of our veterans now coming back. That's not always been our view, but it is right this minute. So when you're out trying to muster support for access to justice, and you point out the needs that veterans have, it's an easy way to get better support. I went into a congresswoman's office a year or two ago, and Annie Moore sat down, Harry Reasoner and I, and she said, I've got a veteran in my district calling me up with a problem. What are you going to do about it? And Harry said, I'll represent him myself. And she said, well.
Tell him to come see me.
She said, well, can I take pictures with you? And she was very supportive. I'm going to help you with what you need here. But it isn't a liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. It's a good government issue, and it's a rule of law issue. And we have a legislature. Pete's an easy sell over there. I hope he is in the Congress. But not everybody over there. We've had tight times in Texas, and it's been hard, but almost to a person. The legislators have been very supportive of the cuts in aisle. Chief Justice Jefferson was over presenting the need at one point, and the Senate Finance Chair was a crusty old oil man from East Texas, and he said, "Well, how much did you lose in IOLTA?" He said, "Well, about $40 million for the biennium." And he said, "Well, you'll take 20, won't you?" And I about fell out of my chair. I thought, did I just get asked whether we could take the money? But that's been an attitude and I will say also, because they see the good work that's done. Because if there was even a sniff that it was being wasted or squandered or misspent some way, I mean, you couldn't pry it out of them with anything. But the community is very well respected.
I must say the heft of the Texas Supreme Court behind this has been a huge part of the success on Inauguration Day at the legislature. When the justices come in their full robes, there's like a glowing in the dark. It's pretty impressive. And I think they do what you ask them to do, and they do see it as a nonpartisan issue because of the makeup of the court. I think it's very, very important. Congressman, do you see any hope for a more bipartisan or nonpartisan approach to these kinds of issues in Washington?
Wow. Well, I was listening to the dean and wistfully thinking about what it would have been like to serve in a Congress that actually did things. When people actually moved forward on legislation. I will tell you that I harbor great hopes, and I wouldn't be there if I was a cynic. And the reason that I harbor great hopes is because at the end of the day, I think there's more that we all have in common, that we feel the same way. We feel the same way about those veterans. I mean, how can you not? Because they have sacrificed so much for all of us. There's certain things I think that are really fundamental. I don't think there's, out of the 535 people, if you ask people about this concept, this idea that everybody's equal before the bar of justice, they will all tell you they agree with it. And so there's got to be a way to put your money where your mouth is. And I think, over the course, the holiday season, my mother always taught me that was the season of miracles. And we came to an agreement on a budget proposal. That was a huge miracle for me. And then, recently on a budget with these huge votes, the majority of the Democrats, the majority of the Republicans voting together. So, I will tell you that maybe we're still all in the holiday spirit, but if it continues that way, I think it bodes well. But I will tell you this one final thing. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not spontaneous combustion. Laws, I finally, when people tell you that something is really hard to do and they say it takes an act of Congress to do that, now I understand what that means. and so I will tell you that the only way that you get an act of Congress is with a lot of participation and a lot of people working the system and talking to their members of Congress, whether it be the right or the left or the middle, because that constituent involvement, and so many of us are tired of politics and we're disgusted by the whole thing, and you don't want to play and you don't want to talk to them. And the truth is that that's when our system needs you the most. Because at the end of a ball game, there's so many times where that's just the wrong time to give up. And so when we find ourselves mired in these partisan bickerings, that's when we need you all to come in and participate the most on these crucial issues like legal services and so many others. So I hope that, over the course of the next year, 2 years, 3 years, that each of you, when you have an opportunity, makes the trek up to D.C., or even in your home districts, visit with your members of Congress to talk to them about how important, how critical this is to everybody.
That's great. And of course, thank you. Thank you for that. We could talk about the present for a long time, but we don't have a long time, so I'd like to talk now about the future. We need you to see, where are we going with all this hard work, all these many people working on this. Dean, what do you see as the big challenges and opportunities for legal aid services?
The possibilities that are offered by new technologies, I think, are real. So there are courts around this country that have created kiosks that allow people to actually, as if they were going to the bank, punch in information, find access to forms, actually assist that pro se litigant to navigate the system with prompts and questions. That's something that's the future, but it's also actually arriving. Another, I think, a great possibility that I mentioned before is alternative dispute resolution, the role of mediation and other kinds of neighborhood legal services that can help people resolve disputes. A third, I can't be a law school dean and not say law schools. So one thing that law schools can do is, of course, make it possible for law students to assist clients, and that's incredibly meaningful for them. They will devote enormous amount of time, and they will learn an enormous amount. But in addition to individual representation, law students can actually participate in helping to simplify those forms, or helping to digitize them and put them on a kiosk, or helping to actually activate the ombudsperson services inside of an agency so that they're more responsive. So I think law schools have a role to play. Pro bono services by practicing lawyers. One of the things that we learned in our pro bono task force is that it's possible for consortia for groups of law firms actually to work together. Kind of shocking, almost like the surprise of Congress working together, but law firms that are competing in other forums actually coming together to create a shared platform to do an efficient form of intake. And maybe even come up with a process so that there can be limited legal representation of a matter, and a lawyer who's a busy lawyer and worried about taking on a pro bono matter can say, okay, I can give 4 hours and then I'll pass it on to someone else, and coming up with a framework so that that's possible. You know, Florida recently had a study that showed that because of the provision of quality legal services, they were able to document an estimated savings of $4.2 million. So as important as it is to appeal to people's hearts here, I'm going to appeal to people's pocketbooks. It's a way to actually prevent more expensive costs to the society. And I think once we demonstrate that I think that we might actually find ways to put together these public and private elements of a solution and of an answer. So I think there are many prospects, many possibilities, but it's going to take a lot of hard work.
Chief, you see a lot of lawyers. You serve as a role model for a lot of lawyers. You also see, I think, from the loftiest bench in the land, where the changes are coming specifically in Texas. First of all, how do you feel like it's best to inspire young lawyers to be as involved in pro bono as, baby boomers are starting to move on? How do you get young people involved and engaged, number one? And number two, what changes in Texas specifically are you seeing that you're hopeful about?
Well, I think the law schools in Texas are doing a marvelous job in, just as the dean said, in trying to give law students in clinic environments and other ways a taste of representing clients, and the reward of actually helping somebody and seeing seeing how much it means to them in their life. It's money can't buy that. And so when that is instilled in law students who I think really want that. I mean, I think that what we've seen the last several years, particularly with law clerks, is that they don't want to leave. They clerk for us, then they go clerk for the circuit, then they come back and clerk for Court of Appeals, and then they go and clerk for a district judge, and then who else can I clerk for, so that I don't have to go face the real world. But some of that is because they're fearful of what that practice is going to mean to them. So I think the law schools are doing a wonderful job and continuing to do that. But I think the court system has got to take a hard look at processes that are not, they don't fit these kinds of situations. So we basically have a pretty much one size fits all. It varies a little bit, and maybe the types of cases vary a little bit. But you come in, you file pleadings, you prepare motions, you maybe take discovery, you come to a point of decision, maybe there's mediation, and then maybe the case goes to some sort of trial before the judge or a jury maybe. We need to think to ourselves, is this really the right approach for all these cases? Are there cases that could use an abbreviated procedure where they just move more quickly to the point of decision? Texas has a rule we wrote about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, trying to do this in lower dollar cases. Say lower dollars, $100,000, but still trying to get make it possible for not just the poor, but also but also people that are just medium income and are struggling. And how can they bring their disputes and get them resolved? So I think we have got to continue to look at that. The problem is lawyers and judges don't like change. We learn it the way we learn it, and by God, we don't want to see it any different. So there's a lot of resistance to anything like this because it's new and it's maybe scary. But we just have to continue to look at the need and see how we can better meet it.
And Congressman, that need is not growing. We're going to give you the last word here tonight. It's not shrinking. I mean, the need is growing, and the money is not skyrocketing. If you had to look into the future, is there any magic wand? Is there any place you can see finding any new revenue sources?
No, I think there's never really any magic wand. I think your options are fairly limited, and frankly, I think it's a question of priorities. One of the interesting things that you see is over the course of the last couple of years, the federal deficit has actually been cut by about 50%. If you compare December of 2013 to December of 2012, in December of 2012 we were still upside down. In December of 2013, I think the number was the government took in $44 billion more than it spent. So you're seeing a righting of the ship. But of course, when you amortize our debt out over this period of time, it's a long time. So the question is, in the meantime, how do you fix that? And I think that is going to require a lot of cooperation in Congress, and they've got to start making some decisions that make sense, as opposed to, if so that I can see you all, I'll put on my glasses and I'll ask you, how many of you have ever sat in a concert and listened to the U.S. Navy band? Okay, there's a few of you. How many of you have ever heard of the U.S. Navy SEALs? That's everybody in the room. And understand that the way the sequester originally worked, the way that it was envisioned and designed and put in, the budget for the U.S. Navy SEALs was cut by the same percentage as the budget for the U.S. Navy band. And when you're making decisions like that, gosh, how dumb is that? And so for me, part of this is going to involve getting some real conversations with real people about what our priorities are going to be, and understanding that you can't take a hatchet to everything, because there's faces and people behind that. And there's a way to save money, and saving money is incredibly important, but we have to do this the smart way. And I will tell you that, I have learned that the smart way to do this many times is by talking to other people. Because the fact, Anna Richards told me 20-something years ago when I got elected that she said, the next morning you didn't wake up any smarter. And she was right. And, your first few days around the Capitol, this incredibly historic building, and you're walking by these rooms and you realize, gosh, that was the hospital during the Civil War, and you pass by a plaque on the floor that Abraham Lincoln had his desk here, So your first few days, you're looking around and you're wondering, wow, how did I get here? But then you meet everybody else and you're wondering, how did they get here? That's just...
I think on that note, well, please join me in thanking this panel. You guys have been great. Thank you.